Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Haris Raghu, and with me is Anita Anand, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. India and Australia agree to conclude free trade agreement by the end of 2022. U.S. Joint Chiefs Chairman warns that Taliban remains dangerous and harbors Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid begins visit to Bahrain in the first ever high-level visit between the two nations. Pyongyang expresses willingness to reactivate hotline with South Korea. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy found guilty of illegal campaign financing. And in cricket, the first pink ball day and night one-off test match between India and Australia women begins in Queensland. As the nationwide free COVID-19 vaccination campaign at government facilities for those above 18 years is underway, we advise our young listeners to get vaccinated and help others get vaccinated. We also advise our listeners not to lower their guard as COVID-19 remains a threat to our health. Please stay at home unless it is essential to go out and continue to follow these three simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. India and Australia have agreed to conclude the Free Trade Agreement FTA between the two nations by the end of 2022. The announcement was made at the end of a meeting between India's Commerce and Industry Minister Mr. Piyush Goyal and his Australian counterpart Mr. Don Tehan. A report.
Hailing the development as a big day for the economic partnership between India and Australia, Australian Trade Minister Dan Tehan said that the two sides agreed on a roadmap towards finalizing the FTA after Thursday's discussions. Speaking to the media, Mr. Tehan affirmed the 2022 deadline for the conclusion of the FTA.
Have agreed today is to make sure that we will conclude a free trade agreement between Australia and India by the end of 2022. Now this free trade agreement will include an interim agreement which we will seek to finalise by Christmas. It will be consistent with Article 24 of the WTO, and it will cover goods, services, investment. We will begin discussing government procurement, energy and resources, logistics and transport, standards, rules of origin, and we have agreed to exchange offers by the end of October.
Article 24 of the WTO agreement allows countries to form customs unions or free trade agreements under two conditions. Firstly, the members are required to eliminate internal barriers to trade inside the customs union. Secondly, the external trade barriers to countries outside the agreement should not be increased on an average. Speaking at the joint press briefing, India's Commerce and Industry Minister Mr. Piyush Goyal said that the deal leverages the complementarities between the two countries and would unlock the trade potential between them. Responding to a question on India's decision not to join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership or RCEP, the minister said that India did not join RCEP because it was not in the economic interest of India.
It did not agree to join RCEP. It was not in the economic interest of India at certain level, but that did not mean that it was because we had any problems with a particular individual country. And even during our discussions in RCEP, Australia and India had absolutely no outstanding issues. We were able to sort out everything.
The development comes days after the Prime Ministers of the two nations, Mr. Narendra Modi and Mr. Scott Morrison, met in Washington as part of the Quad Leaders Meet. This is Pawan for World News, AIR.
New Delhi has said that China continues to deploy a large number of troops and armaments in the border areas. Responding to a media query about remarks by Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson on Wednesday regarding the border situation, spokesperson of India's External Affairs, Mr. Arindam Bagchi, rejected such statements and said they have no basis in facts. He added that the provocative behavior and unilateral attempts by China to alter status quo in contravention of bilateral agreements that resulted in serious disturbance of peace and tranquility along the LAC in eastern Ladakh. He added, had India had deployed its armed forces in response to Chinese actions to ensure that India's security interests are fully protected, Mr. Bagchi said that it is India's expectation that the Chinese side will work towards early resolution of the remaining issues along the LAC in eastern Ladakh while fully abiding by bilateral agreements and protocols.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of U.S. General Mark Milley has said that there is a real possibility that Al-Qaeda or ISIS could reconstitute in Afghanistan in the next 6 to 36 months. At a House Armed Services Committee hearing, Milley said that the terrorist threat from Afghanistan is smaller than it was on 9/11, but that the conditions could be set for a reconstitution of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Milley said there is a possibility of reconstitution of terror groups in Afghanistan in not too distant future. Concurring with the assessment, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said that Al-Qaeda has been degraded over time and now terrorist organizations seek ungoverned spaces so that they can train and equip and thrive. The top military officials have appeared first time before the Senate after the Afghan pullout. Meanwhile, former Afghan officials who fled the country after the Taliban takeover last month have announced the continuation of the Afghan government in exile. It will be led by former Vice President Amrullah Saleh. A statement released by the Afghan embassy in Switzerland said that the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan is the only legitimate government of Afghanistan that is elected by the votes of the people, and no other government can replace a legitimate one. The statement read after consultations with the elders of the country. They decided to announce the government in exile. The statement said that after the escape of Ashraf Ghani, his first Vice President, Amrullah Saleh, will be leading the country. The statement also said that the three powers of the government, namely executive, judicial and legislative, will be activated soon, and they have been busy consulting in this regard. The statement also has announced their support to the resistance front, the anti-Taliban front led by Ahmad Massoud, and has added that all the embassies and consulates of Afghanistan will be functional as normal. Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid has commenced a 3-day visit to Bahrain. The Israeli Foreign Ministry in a statement said that the visit, which is upon the invitation of Mr. Lapid's Bahraini counterpart, this is the first official visit by an Israeli minister to the Arab nation. Mr. Lapid on Thursday said that he had a diplomatic dialogue with his counterpart, the Foreign Minister of Bahrain. In a tweet, Mr. Lapid said that they talked about taking the official peace between us and turning it into an active economic, security, political and civic friendship. The minister also met Crown Prince and Prime Minister Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa. In a statement on Wednesday, Israel said that both foreign ministers will inaugurate the Israeli embassy in Manama. A number of bilateral agreements will also be signed during the visit. The high-level visit is being hailed as a landmark, coming a year after the two nations established formal ties. Last year, Bahrain agreed to establish ties with Israel under the Abraham Accords brokered by the USA under Mr. Donald Trump's presidency. The United Arab Emirates was the first country to sign on to the Abraham Accords. Bahrain and Morocco followed suit shortly after.
Former French President Mr. Nicolas Sarkozy was found guilty of campaign fraud by a French court on Thursday. Mr. Sarkozy was accused of violating campaign finance laws during his 2012 presidential election campaign. According to reports, he was sentenced to 1 year imprisonment. However, he is allowed to serve that time under house arrest with electronic surveillance. Mr. Sarkozy reportedly did not show up to court for the verdict. Prosecutors accused Mr. Sarkozy of spending nearly 43 million euros in excess of the legal cap on campaign expenditure. Mr. Sarkozy was convicted in a separate fraud case in March. In that case, he was given a 3-year prison sentence for bribery and undue influence, 2 years of which were suspended. North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has said that he is open to restoring the emergency hotline with South Korea. Speaking to the state media, Mr. Kim made the comments before the country's parliament, the Supreme People's Assembly. Pyongyang cut the hotline after joint military drills with South Korea and the US in August. The development comes just days after. North Korea has reportedly fired a short-range missile towards the sea of its east coast. Earlier this month, Pyongyang has also test-fired both ballistic and cruise missiles. The test occurred as North Korea's ambassador said at the UN that no one could deny Pyongyang's right to self-defense and to test weapons. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has ordered Seoul's National Security Council to analyze any intentions behind Pyongyang's latest missile launch and recent statements from Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong. However, North Korea had also expressed willingness to engage in talks with the South. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates around the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Welcome back to the World News. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on the situation in Afghanistan as it looks up to the world for assistance. In conversation are former Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee and journalist Nilova Roy Chaudhary.
Despite all of their efforts, particularly at the United Nations last week, the Taliban have not been able to get either recognition nor have they been able to access the funds that they desperately need. Today, Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee is joining us to talk us through the sort of conundrum that the Taliban government in Kabul at this point faces and how, if at all, they can get out of this particular mess that they're faced with. Baswati, hi, good evening. The fact that the Taliban have not even been able to get any assistance from Pakistan and China, two of their primary mentors, what exactly does that mean? I mean, does that mean that they really need to go around with a begging bowl, or is there any way they can circumvent this mess they've got themselves into?
And more than Pakistan, because between Taliban and Pakistan, there are deep fault lines which will become clearer and clearer as the months pass. It is very significant that they've not been able to get either Turkey's support or China's support. Turkey for vital assistance required for their airports and other assistance also, and China. And the reason for this, as Turkey said, as also Imran Khan has said actually, was that keeping women out is un-Islamic, is what Turkey has said. And so did Imran actually. And their insistence on an inclusive government has put the Taliban in a quandary because they do not want at this stage to have an inclusive government because there is huge infighting going on between the Taliban, between the so-called moderates and the hardliners, and so far the hardliners have got the upper hand. So an inclusive government would undermine that. Secondly, they are between a rock and a hard place because even if their closest allies don't come to their rescue and winter is on the way, they have a very, very difficult economic situation where there will be a huge humanitarian crisis and huge refugee flows into Pakistan mainly because there will be a shortage of food, shortage of fuel. It's a harsh winter in many places, and also there is no money in the bank. They haven't got the offices up and running. They haven't got the infrastructure up and running. As you rightly pointed out in your introduction, Nilova, they are now beginning to understand that it's one thing to sweep into power the way they did, but governance comes with a lot of responsibilities which they have absolutely no idea how to do. They have no experience in administration, and those who could have helped them, they've chased them out. And to make it worse, in many parts, the Taliban, younger Taliban, have demonstrated that they are in control, they are executing, they are imposing harsh punishment, they are pushing women out of universities and out of schools. So this may or may not come with the approval of the Taliban leadership in Kabul, but the Taliban leadership in Kabul are also demonstrating that they are not able to control fully their own rank and file, which is also not a good signal for governance. Nilofer.
So the fact is, Bhaswati, that the Taliban is desperate. I mean, they've even written to the Indian government seeking a resumption of flights, saying that the Qatar government somehow is running the airport, which was closed from August the 16th. That apart, India is also the chair of the UN Sanctions Committee, and about 13 people on the governing council of the Taliban are all blacklisted as terrorists by the United Nations. So this doesn't, as you rightly said, they're between a rock and a hard place. But not allowing them access to the Afghan government funds isn't this going to hurt the average person, the average citizen of Afghanistan more than it is, say, just the Taliban?
The assets have been frozen by the Americans. The problem is, Nilofer, that sanctions always come with suffering for the common people. But there is no other way to force the Taliban into compromise on basic issues like inclusive government, like rights for women, etc. There's no other option. As far as flights to Kabul are concerned, there is no question of India agreeing. First of all, the airport is not safe. Secondly, Indian nationals are not safe. And what would happen if we start the flight would be a huge line of Afghan refugees trying to come into India, and we would not be in any position to check, because we have no embassy there, as to whether they are really genuine refugees or terrorists who are coming in to then mount suicide attacks on Indian soil in different parts of India, which is the reason why Putin, if you remember, had said earlier that he is against refugee flows into Central Asia, because he fears that those refugees could also be terrorists who would then infiltrate into Russia. He said it very clearly. And therefore, what would these flights do? If we allow humanitarian relief, we could do that. We would be happy to do that, provided there's an inclusive government. And please don't forget also, Nilofer, as you rightly pointed out, their government consists of individuals who are in the UN Sanctions Committee, of which we are the chair. One of them, the defense minister, is the one who mounted the suicide attack on the Indian embassy in Kabul when my batchmate, Jayant Prasad, was ambassador there. He narrowly escaped with his life. We lost our military attaché, we lost a foreign service officer, and many other people in the suicide attack. And this man is the defense minister of Afghanistan. So it is, and also there is the interior minister who has a very poor reputation and is on the sanctions committee. So under these circumstances, there's no question of resuming flight. And unfortunately, despite the hardship, there is no other option for the Americans but to freeze the assets so that the Taliban would be forced to compromise on basics, which would be to allow some governance, to form an inclusive government, to allow women out, to allow them to take up their jobs. Right now, the only government jobs available for Taliban women in Kabul are to clean women's toilets, Nilofer. And that is really shameful and so disheartening for Afghan women who thought that they had a new future with education, with jobs, and bringing money home for their families. So this kind of situation cannot be allowed to continue. And especially not in the name of religion, because that's another point which many Islamic countries are saying, is that the Taliban cannot misinterpret Islam to suit their political ends. It has never been said that the women can only clean women's toilets. They have no right to education. So they are distorting Islam, and this is highly objectionable to many moderate Muslim countries who said they don't agree with the Taliban's interpretation of Islam on many issues, including on women. But to continue with the second phrase.
No, I completely agree with you. And in fact, a lot of the women, including former legislators from Afghanistan who have all said that the international community must not lift sanctions on these people, because otherwise that is the only lever at this point by which they might agree to some species of, control and, changing the way that they have been governing and going around killing people and not allowing women to be participants.
This is a familiar argument, Nilofer, if you remember, during the years when we were trying to bring down the apartheid regime, there was always this uncomfortable notion that we were actually making it worse for those under apartheid. But we had to continue in order to force the apartheid regime out. There was no other way. And that is exactly the same for what we're doing right now to the side. Sorry to interrupt.
Right. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, as in yesterday, a group of Republican senators has introduced a bill in the U.S. Senate seeking sanctions on the Afghan Taliban additionally, and if this is signed into law, the U.S. president is going to have some degree of control, and again, the whole issue of sanctions is going to be coming in. They will be able to monitor more closely, and they will effectively be cutting off not only aid to the Taliban, but also the people who support them. Now, to your mind, does this kind of a bill with that sort of be in line with the kind of thing that India is thinking of in terms of how the Taliban can be brought to book?
We have never said anything publicly on this issue, Nilüfer, and I doubt if we would say that, because I understand, have some kind of back channel discussions because the Taliban wanted it. There was one public meeting, of course, as you know, at high levels, and these contacts have continued. We do not want to give the Taliban the impression that we want the Afghan people to go through additional hardship in a harsh winter that is coming up. But we want the Taliban to understand that just as they are publicly saying that they want India back, they want us to complete their development project, they want us to resume flights, they are reminding us that there is a memorandum of understanding between the Aviation Authority of Kabul and India. All this would work provided they could govern, they could have an inclusive government, and they could also guarantee security for foreign missions in Kabul. So if any mission, whether it's India or a country supposedly close to them, wants to go back and have a mission up and running, they would have to guarantee the security of the people in that mission. If we send in people for development projects, they would have to guarantee their safety. That is precisely what is holding back the Chinese, because as the Chinese are realizing slowly that not only is Afghanistan rightly called the graveyard of empires, but it is one thing to promise some billion yen to the Afghans as a publicity gesture. It's quite another thing to send in Chinese nationals whose security is uncertain deep into Afghanistan for development projects that's already run in trouble in Baluchistan in Pakistan. So I think the Chinese at some point will have to do a rethink, whether public or private, on how much they can invest in an Afghanistan ruled by a Taliban which is running a non-inclusive, hardline Islamic fundamentalist government and interpreting the Sharia in a manner which is being disputed by other Islamic countries based on the rule of the Sharia. So this is a time when we would have to wait it out, Nilüfer, until things become clearer. Right now, the security situation is not good. For normal Afghans, the security situation would be very dangerous for any Indian national or diplomat whom we could send there to re-establish a normal relationship with Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mukherjee.
Thank you very much, Nilüfer. It's a pleasure.
A prominent Rohingya community leader, Mohibullah, was shot dead in the refugee camp of Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh on Wednesday evening. He was killed by unknown assailants at his office room in Kutupalong under Ukhia Upazila of Cox's Bazar last night. Our Dhaka correspondent reports that the 46-year-old Rohingya leader was the chairman of the Arakan Rohingya Society for Peace and Human Rights, ARSPH, based in Cox's Bazar. He was a key figure in the Rohingya repatriation process as the representative of over 1 million refugees currently living in camps in the Cox's Bazar area of Bangladesh.
India's ambassador to China, Vikram Misri, has called for reformed multilateralism, resilience and redundancy in the global value chains to meet current and future challenges. Delivering a lecture at New Development Bank NDB Think Lab in Shanghai, he said that serious reform of global political and economic architecture is necessary. He said that reform of the UN, including the Security Council, together with reforms at WTO, WHO, World Bank and IMF are imperative in order to promote inclusion, democracy and accountability.
Moving on to sports, the first pink ball day and night one-off test match between India and Australia women at the Carrara Oval in Queensland, Australia began on Thursday. The first day's play was suspended after tea due to rain. At the draw of stumps, the visitors had scored 132 runs for the loss of 1 wicket. Smriti Mandhana was batting on 80 while Poonam Raut was on 16. Mandhana put on a batting masterclass to help India post respectable score on a rain-hit day. In the UEFA Champions League, Cristiano Ronaldo fires in a last-minute winner to seal a win for Manchester United against Villarreal Wednesday night. The two sides playing in Manchester United's home ground, the Old Trafford Stadium, were level with 1 goal each until the 94th minute. Ronaldo picked up a loose ball in the penalty box and scored from an acute angle, sending the Manchester United faithful into a rapturous celebration.
And now a report from the business world.
The Sensex plunged 287 points or 0.48% to finish at 59,126. The NSE Nifty also ended 93 points or 0.53% down at 17,618. Among global markets, Asian shares traded mixed and range-bound after logging heavy China-driven losses this week. China's Shanghai Composite Index climbed 0.9%, Singapore's Straits Times gained 0.4%, and South Korea's Kospi rose 0.3%. Amongst the losers, Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 0.4% and Japan's Nikkei index slipped 0.3%. European markets were mixed in intraday trade. Oil prices fell after rising above $80 a barrel this week. The crude prices fell amid rising U.S. crude inventories, stronger dollar, and an expected supply deficit over the coming months. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading around $78.20 per barrel. Back home, gold prices rose 35 rupees at multi-commodity exchange for October contracts, in sync with gains in the international markets. The precious metal was trading at 45,620 rupees per 10 grams. Silver also added 135 rupees to 58,520 rupees per kilogram for December contracts when reports last came in. In the forex market, the rupee weakened 9 paise to close at 74 rupees and 24 paise against the US dollar. Rajesh Lake for World News, All India Radio.
And now let's take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Guardian says uncertainty hovers over Helmand schools as Taliban ban older girls. The Globe and Mail write, youth climate activists including Thunberg push G20 president on climate talks. Wall Street Journal reports China's manufacturing weakens as power cuts threaten more damage. The Sydney Morning Herald says after supermarket stabbing, New Zealand makes it illegal to plan terror attacks. Financial Times writes, World Trade Organization clambers towards an unambitious summit. Sputnik News reports US Navy taps Atlantic Destroyer Task Group to hunt for Russian subs, citing new strategic threats.
A quick look at the headlines once again. India and Australia agree to conclude free trade agreement by the end of 2022. US Joint Chiefs Chairman warns that Taliban remains dangerous and harbors Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid begins visit to Bahrain in the first ever high-level visit between the two nations. Pyongyang expresses willingness to reactivate hotline with South Korea. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy found guilty of illegal campaign financing. And in cricket, the first pink ball day and night one-off test match between India and Australia women begins in Queensland. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Botswana on their national day. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.